Hello everyone, I'm Karen from Sew and Save, and we're here in my sewing studio at the Ponderosa today to do block 10 of our Catapult block of the month. We've been working on this all year long. It's October, and after this we have 2 more blocks left to do, and this month's block is a beautiful one. So thank you for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can get every single month's instructions and sew along with us. So in order to do this, you would need the Catapult instruction sheets as well as the Cat's Cradle trim tool. So this is a Creative Grids ruler, and it works perfect to make our Cat's Cradle blocks perfect every single month. So we're doing this in conjunction with our Sew What Club that meets every 3rd Monday of the month. So this month we're doing month 10. So are you ready to get started? This is our block 10. We have a 4 patch, and then we have some flying geese, and then our Cat's Cradle blocks in the corner. So to do that, you are going to have to pull out your instruction sheet, and we're doing ours a little bit different than the instructions this month because we are using our Ultimate Flying Geese ruler to make those flying geese. They will turn out perfect, perfect, perfect. You will have 4 of them made all at once, and the block will go together just beautifully. So grab your Ultimate Flying Geese ruler because you're going to need that. So for the people in our class, they received a special set of instructions for cutting because the cutting will be a little bit different than the cutting for making traditional flying geese blocks. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out with gold squares. You're going to have 2 gold squares, and those are going to be in your 4 patch. Then you're going to need red rectangles, the great big ones, and then you're going to need 2 of those, and you'll need 4 red squares. So this month our Cat's Cradle block is all one color, and it's the red. So these 2 red pieces are used in your Cat's Cradle block. Then for our background squares, ours are a little bit different because we're going to be cutting 4 squares instead of, I think it says 12 squares, because we'll only need 4 squares to make the flying geese with the Ultimate Flying Geese ruler. Otherwise, the other pieces are the same. We're going to need 4 background strips, which are going to attach to those flying geese on all 4 sides, and then 4 background rectangles to go along with, the red pieces to make your Cat's Cradle blocks. Put those back up there. Those are for our flying geese. Then from the blue, you're going to have 2 squares, and those are going to end up going along with your gold squares to make that 4 patch. And then 1 great big brown square to make that Ultimate Flying Geese that we're going to make. So instead of cutting 4 rectangles, we're cutting 1 great big square, and it's going to match up with 4 background squares to use the Ultimate Flying Geese ruler. This is a fun and simple block. The first thing that we're going to start out with is the 4 patch in the center. Then I'll go on and show you how to make 4 half square or 4 flying geese blocks using your Ultimate Flying Geese ruler. And then we'll finish up with making your Cat's Cradle blocks. After that, we sew it all together, and you'll end up with this beautiful block 10. The first step in making block 10 is to make this little 4 patch. And to do that, we're going to use 2 gold squares and 2 blue squares. We will line them up. I kind of line them up on my little board so I know exactly which way they're going to go. Flip one over, flip the other over, line them up right sides together, and stitch 1/4 inch on both of these edges. I then go over to my ironing board. Now you can do 2 things. You can kind of press toward the dark, or you can press it open because I like these to be nice and flat. I pressed mine open. But if you press them toward the dark, then when you lay them together, your seams will nest. So go over, stitch at 1/4 of an inch, and press them the way you like them, and then come back. And this is what you're going to do. So I've got mine, I've got a light and a dark sewed together, and a gold and a dark, I should say, and a gold and a blue sewed together, and I pressed my seams open. Now when I stitch these, what I do is I line up these center seams, and I stitch just over the top of that seam so that I can then kind of look at it, open it up, and look at it and see if my seams are lined up. If I'm happy with that, then I'll go back to my sewing machine and stitch all the way across. If I don't like it, then I just have this little bitty bit to pull out, and I try again. Because you know, even if you try to binder clip these or pin them, by the time you start over here and you start stitching and you get up to this, everything kind of just shifts and moves. So by just stitching over your seam and making sure that your seams are perfectly lined up just the way you like them, this locks this in as you stitch from here all the way to the end. So now that I have these two lined up perfectly, I'm going to go back to my machine and at 1/4 of an inch stitch all the way across, and I'm going to press these open flat. Now I have my gold and blue 4-patch all finished up. My center lines up perfectly. Everything is pressed nice and flat in the back, and you don't have that great big bump in your seam. So I can just set this aside. And the next thing we're going to do is make those 4 flying geese. Now for this, we're going to use our Ultimate Flying Geese ruler. So you can do this the old-fashioned way, I want to say, or the traditional way, and those instructions are written right on your sheet. But I'm going to show you how to use your Ultimate Flying Geese ruler to make 4 perfectly perfect 2¼ or 2½ by 4½ inch flying geese blocks. So to do that, the first thing you're going to do, you won't need your ruler yet. We use your ruler to trim these down once we get everything sewn together. So the first thing you're going to do is lay your background squares on top of your brown square, and then you're going to draw a line diagonally through this block, just like this. I'm using my Quilter's Magic Wand to do that. It fits all the way straight across. If you're now the next thing we're going to do is sew 1/4 of an inch from this seam line. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, this ruler has a line going straight through this, and you could line up the line from diagonal to diagonal, and then by drawing on either side of that, you'll have 1/4 of an inch from either side of that line that runs straight through the center of the ruler. So whatever makes you more comfortable, you should do that. So we're going to stitch 1/4 of an inch on either side of this line, and then we're going to trim and press these going toward the background on both of these. So I've done all my stitching. I trimmed on the line that I drew in the back after I stitched 1/4 of an inch from each side of that line, and then I pressed my background squares straight up, and now it looks like a heart. So a lot of times they call this the heart method in making flying geese. I have 2 squares left, and one I'm going to put down on this point. The other will go down onto this point. We now want to take our Quilter's Magic Wand and just draw a line diagonally through that square. And you're going to do that on each one. At this point, you're going to go back and stitch 1/4 of an inch on each side of the line that we're drawing. So you're going to stitch 1/4 of an inch on each side of these. And you can see when you flip this up that you're going to have a flying goose block. and these are going to be too big, and we're going to use our Ultimate Flying Geese ruler to trim them down. So you're going to stitch on either side of this line, trim on that line, and then flip your background piece up so it looks like you have a flying geese when you're done. And you will end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, all at one time in just no time at all. I now have 4 flying geese blocks. Wasn't that easy? Now all we have to do is trim them down and they're going to be perfect, because you can see that mine are not at all perfect. No, they're not. So I'm going to use my ruler, and Gizmo's going to assist us, and we're going to use the letter D on the trim one side. Yeah, this is pretty boring, huh, Gizmo? On the trim one side of the ruler, we're going to use the letter D, because our block, when it's all sewed together, is going to be 2 by 4. So following the letter D, which is kind of like a little pointy mountain, we're going to line up the D right on the seam that I sewed, and I'm going to trim across the side and up the top. I have all of these laying out exactly the same, and then I'm just going to pick up my ruler and move and trim. So the letter D dotted line is right on the seam that I sewed, and I'm just going to trim off one side and then the top. So we're going to trim off the right side and the top. Pick it up, line up the letter D with the seam that I sewed, trim, and then move on. It's that simple, and look at how perfect they're looking. Because now from that point to the edge of my fabric is exactly 1/4 of an inch. So when you sew everything together, you will not be trimming off those beautiful, beautiful points you have. We'll do one more, and then we're going to flip, not only flip the block, but also flip the ruler, because we are on trim side 1, and the other side is trim side 2. All righty, close up my little cutter there. Get my scraps out of the way, just sweep those out of the way, and now you're going to lay them in front of you like a V. Okay, there you go. And now we're going to look at the trim 2 side of my ruler, and again we're going to look at D and the 2 by 4 line on the trim 2 side. So this little V is going to line up with the V on my seam line, and the 2 by 4 line will line up with the edge that I've already trimmed. And you can see that you have that non-slip stuff all over this ruler, so as you trim, it's not going to slip. So I have D lined up with the V on my ruler, or on my block, and the 2 by 4 from the ruler lined up with the edge that I just sewed. Now I'm just going to trim the other side, and they are going to be beautiful and perfect. Pick it up, lay it down, do it again. Just like this. And look at how beautiful they are, and they go together so fast. That's what I like. We've got all 4 done for our block all at the same time, and all perfectly perfect. I'm going to trim one more, and then we will be ready to do the next step. So the next step that we're going to do is use these little flying geese and attach a background strip to them, a 2.5 by 4.5 inch strip on the top of all of these. So you're going to do it across the top, line these up right sides together, and you're going to stitch 1/4 of an inch across the top of all of these blocks. And then I'm just going to flip this up and press it like that. I'm not going to try to press that open, because this will end up getting a little lumpy there if you try to press it back on itself. So I'm just going to stitch 1/4 inch on all of these, flip this up and press. Then we'll be ready for our next step. All right, now I have all 4 of my flying geese stitched to my little background rectangles. And when we put this all together, they're going to go on either side of that little 4 patch that we did. So it'll kind of look like a square and a square. So now what we're going to do is make those cat's cradle blocks for the 4 corners, and we're going to be all set and ready to go with this block. We are now going to make our cat's cradle blocks. And to do that, we're going to use 2 of our big red rectangles, 4 red squares. So this is all going to be red this time. And then our background rectangles. We'll take these and line up those red squares with the background rectangles, all 4 of them, because we're going to end up making 4 in the end. Sew these at 1/4 inch and then press them away from the square. So that's what I've done here. I've sewn all 4 of these and I've pressed them away from the square toward the background. Now I'm going to lay these together with the red squares in opposing corners and stitch at 1/4 inch, just like we have every other month. Stitch 1/4 inch, make your little cut halfway through, and then again press away from the red square toward the cream background. I have all these stitched together. My seams are pressed away from my red corners toward my background fabric, and now I'm ready to lay my big rectangles on top and mark it with my Frixion pen and my cat's cradle ruler. So we're going to grab our cat's cradle ruler, wrong ruler, here we go. We're going to line up the placement line once again right on the seam line that we sewed, and we are going to draw a line. This time we're not going to sew 1/4 inch away. This time we're going to sew right on the lines that we draw. Do this one and then the other side, and then do the same on the other one. At that point, we'll come back and I'll show you how to trim these down so that they are perfect, perfect, perfect. Once we do that, we'll be ready to sew our whole block together. Isn't that amazing? That went really fast, didn't it? Very fast block this month. There we go. I'm going to go and stitch, and we'll come back and trim them all down. I have both of my blocks stitched on the line that I drew, and now I'm going to trim them up. First, I'm going to cut them apart, line up my 1/4 inch seam allowance right on the line that I stitched, flip my block over, and do the same on this side. You don't trim off much, but you just do trim off a little bit. Get a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance on that. And then do the same on this one. Flip it around, trim off the excess, and now we're ready to trim these down and make them the perfect size for our block. We're going to look at the instructions, and the instructions tell you to trim at the number or at the 4-inch mark on your ruler. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to line these up so they look like little triangles in front of me, little mountains. We're going to take the other end of our ruler, line up the dashed line on the seam that we sewed, and the 4-inch little V line right on the other seam on our little square in the corner. So you can see I lined up the dotted line with my seam and the V with the red square. Trim those up, and they are going to be just perfect. Look at that. Ooh, I love it that they're perfect. Lots of extra to trim off, so everything lines up great when we sew the block together. 2 more, And then I'm going to take these over to the ironing board and give them a nice press so that we can assemble our block. It's easier to trim this down when it's all closed because you only have to do one set of cutting. You don't have to trim and then turn your block. One set of cutting and everything is perfect. Go and press these, come back, and we will put the block together. I have these all beautifully pressed, and now it is time to lay out our block. I'm going to start with my 4 patch in the center. Then I'm going to flank it with the little flying geese blocks we made. Just like that. Looking good so far. And then I'm going to add my cat's cradle block, and the solid triangle goes toward the center on this block. Just like this. Oops, get in there. Beautiful. I'm going to pick this whole thing up. I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine, and I will stitch across and across all 3 rows, and then stitch the 2 rows to the center. Here is our finished block. Oh, I love this one. I think this is my favorite. Every month I say, I think this one's my favorite. And then the next month I say, I think this one's my favorite, but I like them all. So when I sewed this together, the top row I pressed toward the triangles. The middle row I pressed toward the 4 patch. The bottom row I pressed toward the triangles. And then once I sewed it all together, these 2 seams are also pressed toward the triangle rows. So this is your block 10. We have 2 more blocks to make, and we will be ready to start putting our quilts together. There are lots and lots of different choices in sewing this together in your packet, so you can kind of start looking and thinking about how you want your quilt to look when it's all done, because all of these blocks are beautiful and you're going to want to use them all in your quilt. So we will see you next time for block 11. See you soon.